Elena Sanchez was 7 months pregnant when tragedy struck. Her husband, Javier, lay in a coma after a terrible accident, and instead of standing by her, his family turned on her. They blamed her, stripped her of everything, and handed her nothing but a broken, half-roofed house, mocking her as she walked away. But inside that ruin, Elena uncovered something no one expected. A secret her husband had hidden long before the accident. It was enough to fight for his life, protect her unborn child, and rewrite the destiny his family tried to steal. The rain that night didn't stop. It hammered against the glass windows of the hospital, soaking the world in a cold, endless rhythm. Elena sat in the waiting area, her swollen belly pressing against the thin fabric of her dress. At 7 months pregnant, her body ached in ways she could barely describe, but none of it compared to the ache in her chest. Behind the heavy doors, her husband Javier lay motionless. A car accident had stolen him from her arms and placed him into a coma the doctors couldn't predict he would ever wake from. She pressed her hands together, whispering, "Please, Javier, please come back to us." The creak of expensive shoes broke her prayer. She looked up to see his family standing in a stiff row, faces pale, lips pursed, eyes full of judgment. His mother was the first to speak, her voice sharp as a blade. "You've brought nothing but ruin to this family. Look at him lying there, because of you." Elena's breath caught. She opened her mouth, but words stuck in her throat. One of the brothers shook his head slowly, muttering, "She should have never been here, never married him." They didn't come to comfort her. They came to bury her. Within a week, papers were shoved in her face. Deeds, accounts, assets, everything Javier owned was stripped from her hands under the guise of family rights. They insisted Javier was as good as dead, that she had no claim to his legacy.
"He's gone," they hissed.
"You're nothing to us now." Neighbors whispered, too. One evening, Elena overheard two women outside the hospital cafeteria. "She's the one, you know, the wife." "Yeah, I heard she's the reason he crashed. Must have been fighting in the car." Elena froze where she stood, clutching her paper cup of watery coffee until it crumpled in her hand. By the time the storm cleared, she had lost everything except the life inside her belly. Then came the final blow. One morning, a cousin tossed her a set of rusted keys, sneering, "Since you want something here," he had an old, unfinished property out on the edge of town, not worth more than $1,000. "Go live there." Their laughter followed her out of the mansion like a pack of wild dogs. She clutched her belly with one hand and the keys with the other, walking into a future she hadn't chosen. When she reached the property, Elena's heart sank. The house was barely a house at all. A broken shell of bricks, patches of roof missing, wooden boards loose and rotting. Grass pushed through cracks in the floor. Wind whistled through the hollow rooms like a ghost. She stood there in the mud, her dress clinging to her body from the rain, her swollen feet sinking into the ground.
For a long moment, Elena said nothing.
Her eyes burned, but no tears came. Finally, she whispered to herself, steadying her breath, "If this is what they left me with, then this is where I'll start." The laughter of his family still echoed in her ears. But beneath it, something deeper stirred, a quiet flame, small but unyielding. The unfinished house became Elena's only refuge. At night, the half-roof rattled in the wind, letting in cold air that made her shiver beneath the thin blanket. When rain came, water slipped down the walls, dripping onto the mattress. She pushed into the driest corner. Sometimes she woke to the sound of dogs howling outside, the shadows flickering in the cracks of the wooden boards. Her days blurred into survival. She rose before dawn, tying a scarf around her hair, pulling on the same worn shoes. She cleaned houses for a few coins, washed laundry for strangers, sometimes cooked in small shops where the smoke clung to her clothes. Every step weighed heavier as her belly grew, but she refused to stop. Every coin she earned was stretched between her meals and bus fares to the hospital. The hospital became her second home. She sat beside Javier's bed, whispering softly even when he didn't move. She'd adjust the thin blanket, straighten his foretube, hold his hand against her stomach so he might somehow feel their unborn child. Nurses passed by, glancing with pity, sometimes with judgment, and the gossip never stopped. One afternoon, as Elena stood in line at the hospital cafeteria with a tray of plain rice, she heard two men muttering behind her. Poor thing living in that broken place. Yeah, but you know his family. They say she ruined him. Maybe she deserves it. Elena stiffened, pressing her lips tight. She didn't turn around. She simply picked up a tray and walked to a corner, chewing each bite slowly, as if to bury their words. But nothing cut as deeply as what came next. Late one evening, the doctor asked to speak with her privately. His face carried the weight of something he didn't want to say. He leaned against his desk, sighing before the words left his mouth. Elena, his family came to me. They suggested it might be better to let him go. They believe keeping him alive is cruel, that it's kinder if I end it quietly. The air left her lungs. She gripped the edge of the desk, her knuckles white. What? She whispered. They call it mercy, the doctor murmured, lowering his gaze. But I couldn't. I had to tell you. Elena staggered back, one hand clutching her swollen belly, the other trembling against her chest. Her knees nearly buckled as the words replayed in her mind. End him quietly, as if Javier's life was theirs to take. As if her love, her fight, her unborn child's father was disposable. She walked out of the office in silence, the hall spinning. By the time she reached the bus stop, her face was wet, not from the drizzle but from tears she hadn't even realized were falling. She pulled her scarf tighter, sat on the cold bench, and whispered into the night, "They want you gone, Javier, but I swear I won't let them win." Days turned into weeks. Elena's belly felt heavier, her steps slower, but she kept moving. She worked, she prayed, and every evening she returned to the half-roofed house that felt less like shelter and more like a constant reminder of her exile. One afternoon, while sweeping the dusty floor to make space for a small crib she hoped to build, her broom caught on something uneven. A hollow sound echoed beneath the wood, different from the rest. She paused, frowning, kneeling slowly. She pushed her swollen belly aside, ran her fingers over the cracked board, and tapped it again. Thunk. It wasn't solid. Her breath quickened. With effort, she pried at the board, her nails scraping until the wood splintered. Beneath it, wedged deep in the foundation, was a metal box, rusted at the edges, but still locked tight. Elena's heart pounded as she pulled it free, dust coating her palms. For a moment, she just stared at it, uncertain whether to laugh or cry. It looked old, forgotten. Her fingers trembled as she forced it open, the hinges squealing in protest. Inside, the world shifted. Stacks of cash, crisp though aged. Gold jewelry wrapped in cloth. Envelopes filled with legal documents, deeds, account statements, contracts, all in Javier's name, all real. Her hand shook so hard she nearly dropped them. She pressed her lips against the back of her hand to silence the sob that tore out of her chest. "Oh my God, Javier, you left this." She sat there on the dusty floor, the wind whistling through the broken roof, cradling the box against her belly like it was another child. The paper smelled faintly of old leather and ink. Proof of a life Javier had quietly safeguarded long before the accident. For the first time in months, a flicker of hope burned through her exhaustion. Maybe this wasn't the end. Maybe she had just been handed the one chance she needed. Elena wiped her tears, folded the documents carefully back into the box, and whispered, "They thought they buried us, Javier, but they don't know we were planted." Elena didn't waste a moment. The next morning, she carried the documents to a small law office, tucked between a tailor's shop and a bakery. The lawyer adjusted his glasses, scanning each page slowly, then looked up at her with quiet surprise. "These are valid. Very valid. Whoever left them here was protecting something." She nodded, clutching her belly.
He was.
"And now I need to use it." Piece by piece, she sold off the jewelry, never too much at once, never loud enough for the whispers of Javier's family to catch wind. With the first stack of bills, she walked back into the hospital and paid Javier's debts in full. The receptionist blinked at her in disbelief. "All of it?" Elena simply nodded, sliding the envelope across the counter. From that day forward, the hospital staff knew not to question her authority. She was Javier's voice, his guardian, his shield. At home, the half-roofed house remained her base, but something inside had shifted. She scrubbed the floors, patched holes with scrap wood, and hung a thin curtain near the window. It was still broken, but now it felt less like a ruin and more like a battlefield headquarters. The weeks rolled into months, and Elena's body finally gave in to its countdown. One dawn, after hours of silent labor, she clutched her newborn daughter, Sophia, in her arms, tiny, fragile, with her father's nose. Elena's tears fell freely onto the baby's cheeks as she whispered, "He's waiting for you, little one. We'll bring him back." Balancing motherhood and hospital visits nearly broke her. She strapped her daughter to her chest in a sling, walking the long halls, singing softly while sitting by Javier's bed. Sometimes she pressed little Sophia's hand around Javier's fingers, whispering through the hum of machines, "She's here. She's real. Don't leave us now." Nurses gossiped in the hallway. "Isn't that the wife?" "Yeah, still coming every day."
Poor thing.
"Doesn't she know he's gone for good? She's wasting her life." Elena heard them, but instead of flinching, she adjusted her daughter's blanket, kissed her forehead, and kept speaking softly to Javier. And then a year passed. The child was walking now, her laughter echoing through the sterile room as she toddled around her father's bed. Elena bent to catch her, then froze as Javier's fingers twitched. The machines beeped louder. His eyelids fluttered. A faint sound escaped his throat. Elena's heart slammed against her ribs. She dropped to her knees beside him, gripping his hand with both of hers. "Javier, it's me. It's us. Come back." For the first time in what felt like a lifetime, his eyes opened slowly, painfully, but enough. Their daughter let out a shriek of joy, climbing onto the bed as if she knew. And in that moment, Elena realized the battle she had been fighting alone was no longer hers to carry. Javier's recovery wasn't quick. His body had been still for so long that every step felt like dragging stone. But Elena was there for every falter, every stumble, every painful stretch of muscle. She fed him, coached him, and when frustration broke him down, she held his face in her hands and whispered, "One step at a time. You're not alone." Weeks passed, then months. Strength returned slowly, like the first shoots of green after winter. And when his voice finally steadied, Elena sat beside him, her daughter asleep in her lap, and told him everything. She spoke of the night in the hospital when his family blamed her. She spoke of the keys thrown at her as though she were a beggar, of the unfinished house, the gossip, the hunger, the doctor's warning, and finally of the hidden box she had found. The only reason he was still alive. Javier's jaw tightened, his fists curling on the blanket, his breath came sharp. "They wanted me dead," his voice cracked. Elena nodded, her eyes glistening. Silence hung heavy. Then, with a calm that masked fire, Javier whispered, "They've taken enough. Now it's my turn." When he was strong enough, he met with the lawyer Elena had trusted. The documents from the hidden box became his weapons: deeds, contracts, proof of ownership, proof of theft. The case built itself brick by brick. And when court day arrived, Elena walked beside him. Their daughter held her hand, dressed in a simple white dress, her little curls bouncing as she skipped along the marble hallway. Inside the courtroom, his family sat stiff in their suits, their faces pale as Javier entered. For the first time in years, he wasn't a silent body in a hospital bed. He was a man standing alive and ready for war. Testimonies spilled across the room. The doctor confirmed their visit, their request for him to end Javier's life. Bank records showed assets shifted behind Elena's back. Witnesses recounted how she was mocked, cast out. The very walls seemed to echo with their disgrace. And there, under the unforgiving light of justice, Elena felt years of humiliation peel away. Her voice hadn't been believed.
Her pain had been dismissed.
But now it was undeniable. When the verdict was read, Javier was restored as the rightful owner of his businesses, his properties, his accounts. The family who once laughed in her face now sat frozen, their heads lowered, shame dripping like sweat. Elena stood taller, clutching her daughter's hand. The weight in her chest replaced with something she hadn't felt in so long: freedom. The mansion's gates were no longer guarded by strangers. They opened smoothly as Elena and Javier drove through, their daughter laughing in the back seat. For the first time, this place wasn't hostile ground. It was theirs again. But peace didn't last long. Days later, a knock echoed against the heavy wooden doors. Elena answered, her daughter tugging at her dress. On the porch stood the very faces that had once spat on her name. The mother-in-law who called her cursed. The brothers who mocked her swollen belly. The cousins who laughed as they tossed her keys to a ruin. Their eyes were wet now, their lips trembling. We were wrong," one stammered. "Please forgive us." Elena stared at them, her daughter's small hand warm in hers. Behind her, Javier stepped forward, his presence filling the doorway.
He didn't yell.
He didn't curse. He simply looked them in the eyes, then closed the door with a firm hand. Silence. Inside, Elena exhaled deeply, sinking into the sofa as sunlight poured across the polished floors. Her daughter toddled across the room, giggling, chasing after a ball. Javier sat beside her, their fingers intertwining. They didn't need revenge. The silence was louder than any outburst. The door they once slammed in Elena's face had now been shut in theirs. From the half-roofed ruin worth $1,000 to a home filled with love and justice. The journey had carved something unbreakable inside her. She glanced at Javier, then at their daughter, and whispered softly to herself, "What they meant to destroy only made us whole." And so the family who laughed as they cast Elena aside were left standing outside, begging at the very door they once shut in her face. But Elena and Javier didn't need revenge, because true justice had already been served.